coming out as a trans person, many people believe myths and stereotypes about us. And then these people will generally label us with these stereotypes. So in this episode of Stacy Links Presents, I wanted to dispel myths and stereotypes about trans people and share the truth about us. Stick around, I'll be right back. So welcome to my channel. I'm Stacy, and as I mentioned in this episode, I wanted to talk about myths and stereotypes about trans people and talk about the truth of how we really are. I myself, for one, am not stereotypical. I am very atypical as a trans person, and I would like to express how different I am and many other trans people compared to these stereotypes. So before I get started, what I'll get you to do, if you're a transgender person interested in fashion, makeup, and jewelry, make sure you go down below in this video and hit that subscribe button. I have many videos on my makeup tutorials, fashion, and jewelry ideas that I'm sure you'd love to see. Plus, I'm doing advocacy for the LGBTQIA+ community and documenting my transition as a single parent. And also be sure you're following me on social media. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and on TikTok. Check the description below in this video for all my social media links. So I have a list of 10 points, myths and stereotypes that I want to go through. I'm going to start with the least damaging to the most damaging myths and stereotypes. So make sure you stick around right to the end, and I will tell you all of these stereotypes and discuss the facts around them. All right, so one thing, usually the first thing that a lot of people will believe, especially when we come out for the first time to someone, is that we're confused about ourselves. So we think that we're trans because there's some confusion in our minds. And there are other reasons why people believe that we're confused about it. Another myth that a lot of people believe about us is that we are intentionally doing this to try to trick others into believing that we are actually, the point of the matter is we're not trying to trick people. We're not confused, especially with somebody like me, that I've been in this debate for the last 30 years. At this point, I'm pretty sure I know my own identity. Another thing people will generally believe is that being trans is linked to sexual orientation, which is so far from the truth. Usually, we will discover our sexual orientation before realizing we're trans. And for some trans girls, the ones who will transition fully and get surgery, and who do date cisgender men, usually they start out believing that they are gay men who are very femmy, then realize that they are attracted to cisgender men and not gay men, and realize they like to wear dresses and makeup. So then that's when they realize that they are a binary straight trans woman. However, for someone like me, it's not so simple. Because for me, I've known that I was pansexual for a very long time. But that was probably one of the things that was keeping me from realizing that I am also trans, despite my sexuality, because too much of society believes that's the way it works for us, when it really doesn't for the majority of us. Not even being on hormones will change who you're attracted to. So then another myth about trans people is that letting us use the washroom of our identity is dangerous to others. And now the big myth on that is people believe that trans people are just men pretending to be women to hide out in the women's bathroom and SA cisgender women, which is so far from the truth. There is nothing like that going on. As a matter of fact, I would see cisgender man trying to sneak into the women's bathroom and hide out and them do it. There's never been an incident of a trans girl essaying a cis woman in a public bathroom. Another stereotype that we often have placed upon us is that people believe that every single trans person will go on hormones and have surgery, which again is not true. As a matter of fact, not quite half of all trans people will actually go on HRT, and less than a quarter of all trans people will actually have any kind of surgery at all. Most of us don't have surgery, and many trans people don't go on hormones either, so that is definitely a myth. Another myth that a lot of people believe about trans people is that children are unable to identify with their gender identity until they're a certain age. It is actually well known in psychology that children can identify with their gender as early as 3 years old. And I've met many other trans people out there who have known since then. Me, not so much since that time, but I've known since about that time that I'm different. One episode of mine that I recommend you watch if you want to know my history more, I'll pin it up here, is the history of my trans struggles. So you can go ahead and watch that and you'll see exactly where I came from with my trans journey. So then point number 7 kind of rounds up a few things that I've mentioned earlier, is that people believe that trans people are mentally ill. And that's the reason we decide we want to transition. Our transition is not caused by a mental illness. The only disorder we suffer from is gender dysphoria. And that's the reason we transition. Gender dysphoria is not a mental illness, although it is treated as such until it's determined to be true. Then we treat it with gender-affirming care. Another myth and stereotype about trans people is that all trans people are hypersexual. Now, I'm not saying that no trans person is hypersexual, but one thing I can definitely say is once we're on feminizing hormone therapy and our testosterone drops, our arousal isn't even really there much anymore. For someone like me who's M to F, random erections pretty much go away. In order for me to have any sort of erection, I have to stimulate manually. And it's not necessarily a sexual thing to begin with. The next point I have is actually quite damaging, especially to people like me who have kids, is that people believe that trans people hurt kids in some way, either physically, mentally, emotionally, or sexually, which again is not true. As a matter of fact, I believe that trans and other queer people make some of the best parents and child carers out there. Way more supportive, understanding, and loving than many cis parents out there. Especially those cis parents that reject their kids after they come out as queer. That is definitely poor parenting. Last and most certainly not least, this is actually, as I mentioned in the beginning of this episode, this is probably the most damaging rumor, stereotype, myth about trans people, is that transitioning is always very difficult and very emotional. I can attest after being on HRT for 5 months that it has not been extremely emotional. Being on estrogen has actually lifted my moods. It's decreased my mental and emotional dysphoria and is making me feel a lot more comfortable in my own body. Now, it is true that surgery is difficult, and many people, especially with getting bottom surgery, have to go through several months of aftercare and maintenance in order to make sure that they heal up properly. So yeah, that can be somewhat difficult, and some people have had some difficulties after surgery. But for the most part, transitioning is supposed to be a positive experience for us. It's supposed to be a way for us to finally release and be our true selves. Whether we go on hormones or not, whether we have surgery or not, we're still trans. Regardless of where we are in our transition, we're all the same. It doesn't matter if we present full-time or not, we're all the same. It doesn't matter. We're all part of the same umbrella. And these myths and stereotypes that I've just talked about need to be dispelled. And people need to learn the truth about us before it gets even more damaging. Alright, so thanks for watching. Make sure you go down below and hit that thumbs up button and drop a comment. Tell me about your experience with stereotypes in the LGBT community. Stay tuned for my next episode and I'll see you then. Bye!